You're not supposed to defrost meats in warm water due to harmful bacteria growth. You're not supposed to leave food at room temperature for long without being refrigerated because of harmful growth, but when you go to a buffet, food can sit out for hours under heat lamps and be fine? There's a concept in food safety called the danger zone. It extends from about 40 degrees Fahrenheit 5 degrees Celsius to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit 60 degrees Celsius. You can keep food below the lower end of that range, or above the upper end, for a while without it going bad. The reason is that this is approximately the range of temperatures that the bacteria that cause foodborne illness can tolerate well enough to grow. They can survive in lower temps, but they won't grow or will grow very slowly. Which is why you can store meat in the fridge for a few days without problems. They'll die at higher temps if they're kept that hot for a while, as in sous vide cooking, but can survive brief exposure. The food at the buffet is, at least supposed to be, kept above 140 degrees Fahrenheit 60 degrees Celsius, so that whatever bacteria may be present can't grow effectively. The trays at a buffet usually sit above a pool of very hot water in addition to the heat lamps, which keeps them hot. This is if the food does stay out for hours. It may simply be changed out regularly, in which case it can be kept in the danger zone. You can take the keep it above the upper end of the range principle really far, because temps above 140 degrees Fahrenheit 60 degrees Celsius will kill almost all bacteria with prolonged exposure. This is the principle behind perpetual stews. https://en wikipedia.org/wiki/perpetual_stew. Foods which were effectively cooked for years or decades. Buffets also have a much simpler temperature safety control measure that is easy to forget. Food in the danger zone is rotated out and removed, or at least should be, inside of food safety time windows. So as the food gets to 3 to 4 hours total time spent in the danger zone, it is disposed of because it is no longer safe. It's not just about temperature. It's about how long the food spends at that temperature. It is a totally controllable risk in a well-managed establishment. Oftentimes the buffet service doesn't even last long enough for the food to be unsafe by the end of service. So it's just fine. Also, ideally the buffet is busy enough that food is being served and replaced relatively quickly. So nothing is spending more than 30 minutes or an hour on the buffet. I have a master's in public health. Am a registered sanitarian in the Commonwealth of KY, and worked as a food safety inspector for years at a local government health department. All these statements are absolutely correct. Time/temperature controls are one of the primary control points in food safety. Food ready to be served may be kept at or above 135 degrees Fahrenheit or discarded after 4 hours if temperature controls are not used, not preferred, but still allowed under many state food codes. However, documentation on time controls including a time log must be on site and in use. Also, it should be noted, most health regulation not only requires you keep buffet food in a certain temperature range, but they also don't let you take food exposed to the public back into the kitchen. Nor do they allow you to have food in display for longer than a set time, even in a good range. At least that's the rules we have in Canada. A lot of people see the wasted food and say it should be sent to homeless shelters or something. But buffet food has been served and is now dead. If the buffet has servers who actually plate the food, it can be packaged and sent to shelters. Fun fact: sometimes at homeless shelters, you have to sign a waiver to get certain foods. Usually the leftovers from a large company, like pre-packaged sandwiches from a large supermarket. Source: used to stay at a homeless shelter. What's the worst that could happen? Bubble guts? 'Cause I've gotten that when traveling overseas and eating local food, there's probably not a huge risk. I guess it's just the company covering their asses against a food poisoning lawsuit. In addition to what everyone else is saying about the temperature danger zone, Food also needs to be at that temp for a few hours before it has enough chance to grow enough bacteria to be considered unsafe. If a buffet goes through food fast enough, it's safe as long as they ensure they throw out any food that's been out too long. But defrosting meat often takes quite a while, which is why it's particularly dangerous to do incorrectly. This is why I continue to thaw my meat in warm water. It takes 10 minutes maybe, and there's no way that any harmful bacteria have grown enough to be concerning. I should point out that cold water will thaw meat pretty much just as fast as warm water. And running cold water is really the way to go. Keep in mind that the salad bar is usually the biggest source of foodborne illness at buffets. Yeah. In addition to what everyone else is saying, there are guidelines and all. But buffets fail to follow them plenty often. And ops concerns are valid, even though it's known what the solution should be. Microbial growth can be slowed either by keeping food cold or hot. But the range around 41 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit is generally considered unacceptable for controlling the growth of pathogens. That is temperature danger zone. If you're working in a proper commercial kitchen, it will be littered with different types of thermometers to check the internal temp of all meats and dishes that go out. At a buffet, the trays are kept above the danger temperature, and those that do not have a gauge/thermometer on the side are temp checked every hour to ensure they didn't hit the danger zone. There is an amount of time set by statewide food services that deems how long they may stay at unsafe temperatures, how to reheat and store foods, as well as how to safely cater an event. Places serving food in my state might have someone staffed, or manager staffed, with a serve-safe completion, teaches the state rules on food. Which is why this stuff dries out frequently. Methinks. My manager used to put those drying gel you find in bags and stuff in with the food. Said it used to soak up water and prevent bacterial growth them. The first one is kind of an old wives' tale and isn't backed up by science. Except in the case of particularly thick cuts where it will take a very long time to thaw the inside with hot water, keeping the outside in the danger zone for long enough for notable bacteria growth to happen. When you're talking about food at home, you'd likely be perfectly fine if you cooked some food, left it out at room temperature for an hour or two, and then finished eating it. That being said, the advice tends to take into account that you're likely going to put it back in the fridge, warm it up again, and consume more later, potentially multiple times. This gives way more opportunity for bacteria growth later. With a buffet, you cook the food, which kills everything. Set it out and keep it warm. Some stuff like meat might be kept warm enough to slow down, but not completely stop bacteria growth. And then either the entire thing is eaten over a few hours, or it's discarded. Yeah. For home cooking, it's worth keeping in mind that these guidelines are mostly made for commercial kitchens on the assumptions that they're feeding people who might be old or have weak immune systems. They're intentionally very conservative. An hour or two is allowable in commercial kitchens too, isn't it? It's when it goes beyond that it becomes a problem. 4 hours maximum time in the TDZ during prep, prior to cooking to specified internal temperature. Then, maximum of 4 hours in TDZ before you legally must discard the item. This only applies to perishable foods, per FDA regulations for California. Source: I manage a corporate food operation. Okay, 5-year-old explanation. Very cold, freeze and die like you would in Siberia in winter with no coat. Very hot, overheat and die like a person left in a car on a sunny summer day in Phoenix, AZ. In between, live and prosper. Bacteria are like you. Too hot, die, too cold, die. This is the truly simple answer. Just want to add nuance and point out that for most bacteria, cold puts them in a stasis. Instead of killing them, they are frozen literally and figuratively. I've always wondered as well, why does it matter if some bacteria grows when we thaw meat underwater? If we cook it, Does it not eliminate all the harmful bacteria? Because it's not just the bacteria that makes you sick. Bacteria growing on the food also releases toxin as a byproduct, which can also make you sick. These toxins will not be eliminated through cooking. Hence why you cannot just cook spoiled food to make it safe to eat. I see you haven't played Don't Starve. Rev up those ice cubes and monster meats because I sure am hungry for some meatballs. Just one thing to point out is that people get food poisoning from buffets all the time. The food handling guidelines are well grounded and backed by science. And when the food is handled appropriately, see the other posts. The risk is very low. But it's often mishandled. And that's why people get sick at restaurants and especially buffets. Yes. This was what I was thinking of posting as well. Food poisoning from mismanaged buffets is really common. Chefs are required to have a much better understanding of how food go bad, and are therefore able to follow different rules than what you are advised to at home. The big difference in a buffet and one thawing out meats at home is that in the buffet the meat is cooked beforehand. This kills all the bacteria so that it takes a lot longer for any new infections to populate the meat. However, if you do it to raw meat, it have already spent a lot of time at room temperature since the animal was butchered, as a lot of the meat processing takes place above room temperature. So it already have a high population of bacteria and fungi on it. Although not toxic levels. But leaving it out on the counter even longer may cause it to go bad. The advice you get about how to avoid spoiling food is also erring on the side of caution. Meat will not go bad immediately as you put it in warm water, but you should try to avoid leaving it thawed for long periods of time. A lot of people might be tempted to get meat from the freezer in the morning and either put it in warm water or just leave it on the counter, so that it will be thawed when they get home from work, which is obviously a bad idea. They might also be tempted to thaw some meat and cut a portion off it before freezing it again, and doing this multiple times. Do not think so much about the rules themselves, but rather just try to avoid doing anything stupid. Sorry. So what's the recommendation if not the warm water / leaving on the counter? The key takeaway here is not the exact method of thawing meat, but rather that whatever you do, make sure the meat does not stay unthawed for very long, and if it stay unthawed, at least keep it refrigerated. Thawing it in hot water may be fine if you make sure that it thaws out fast, and you use it immediately afterwards. And instead of leaving it on the counter, you may leave it in the fridge to thaw out. But there are plenty of other ways of thawing meat depending on what is available to you, and what you prefer to do. As a former restaurant manager, I bet $100 that food poisoning is much more common in, especially cheap American, buffets than people realize. Most food poisoning is relatively low-grade in nature. Meaning that instead of getting sick to the point of death, you merely feel the urge to race to the nearest toilet a short while after eating. It's a form of harm, but your body mostly handles it unless you're immunocompromised in some fashion. So, every time I ate at my college dining hall, I got food poisoning? Food safety microbiologist for a state regulatory agency here. 1. The top post nailed it. And I'm very excited that so many people chimed in with correct info. 2. As always, there are exceptions. Listeria monocytogenes, L. Mono, can grow albeit slowly under 40-degree refrigeration temps. So what about deli meat in a supermarket? They must have date marking in place to track when the package was first opened. And discard any remaining after 7 days. L. Mono is bad, especially for the unborn. It has about a 25% fetal loss rate if the mother contracts it. The reason they tell expectant moms to avoid deli sandwiches. 3. I frequently reference Two Gun, Danger Zone and Kenny Loggins in a training PowerPoint I would give on the subject. I am thrilled there is a new Top Gun coming out, so this remains relevant. You can defrost meat by placing it in warm water, as long as the frozen meat brings the water temp down to below 40 F quickly. I do it all the time with no issues. I also check the temperature and ensure it's safe. A huge amount of this is people not properly understanding what food safety guidelines mean and are for. By the way, food safety guidelines were not written for your house. They were written for restaurants. A restaurant kitchen is chaos, and it's filled with both people and food and all sorts of other stuff. They serve tons of people. You serve yourself and your family and maybe friends. A restaurant-sized cut of frozen meat is often 10+ pounds. You almost never have that much meat to thaw. So if you take out a steak, even a big one, and put it on a safe place on your counter, it will mostly be fine to thaw there. It won't take that long, and anything that might grow on it will be killed by the fact that you're cooking it, as things will only really grow on the outside. A restaurant can't make those assumptions, for starters, because they often have whole cuts of meat that might take many hours or even days to thaw even at room temperature. Think of how long it takes to really thaw a turkey. In reality, bacterial growth on food is more dangerous after you've cooked it for most things. Because then you just eat it. Think of the heat maps at the buffet as the equivalent of keeping things warm in the oven at home. Also bear in mind that at a buffet, in theory, but not always in practice, the food gets cycled out. Bad stuff like bacteria, fungus, etc. takes a while to take root in meat. At home you rarely ever run into this, unless you're in college and leave pizza out on the counter for days, but in a buffet tons of people are eating that food. If you watch, you'll likely see new food coming out regularly. Sometimes the old stuff just goes in back and gets repurposed, which should include making it safe by way of more cooking, or get tossed when it's old. But in theory, the food on a buffet should always be relatively fresh and safe because of the time as much as anything else. Ground meat needs special attention and care. But any kind of solid meat is fairly easy to avoid food poisoning. Rinse and cook enough to sterilize by the process of cooking. I freeze meat in the package it comes in. Or I break down a large pack into smaller Ziplocs before freezing. I defrost the bag in cold water. Then cook. Been doing something similar for decades. Yet people every day routinely put frozen meat out before going to work and cook it when they get home. Food poisoning from bacterial growth on meat at home is not common at all. This is how my mom defrosted meat growing up. She'd either just set it in the sink or fill a pot with water to defrost in the morning. Then it'd sit there all day until dinner. No one ever got sick. Defrost under running cold water is better, like in a bowl. In a sink, buffet food is supposed to be maintained in heater or cooler device when served. Outside danger zone temperature business should keep a log of checked interval temperatures. Food not being temperature controlled can be out for a max of 4 hours. Then needs to be thrown out/replaced with properly temperature held food. Most professional food businesses hold stricter food safety protocols than the standard mandates. They should be tossing food as it gets old. One of the Chinese buffets by my house got busted with cockroaches living inside the buffet itself underneath all the pans. This happens every year at this location. The Golden Corral by my house got busted sticking entire carts full of full-size baking sheets with meat on them outside of the back door next to the dumpster to defrost. They got busted doing this a couple times. Health inspector here. There are two main factors food safety practices that occur for food that are cooked. They are temperature and time. As other responses have said, the danger zone for exponential bacteria growth is 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. If you keep your food outside of those food temperature range, then your food is safe. Now the FDA food code allows you to hold refrigerated food up to 7 days, but the food quality will go down drastically as time goes. Now there's also this thing called time as public health control. That allows you to cook your food to safe temperature and allow the food to cool down into your danger zone. Catch is, you need to throw away that food after 4 hours pass. Hope that clarified a bit.